attention is required toward what is necessary to make this particular song physically possible. Where do you breathe? How do you breathe? Are phrases long? Are they short? Is the articulation energetic? Is it more smooth and legato? All these kinds of considerations, I think, have to be thought through by the person who is leading the congregation in song, because unless you know, as a leader, what it is this music can be, you're not really leading. You're not giving the singers your idea of how these notes on the page become music, expressive music.
This is a dangerous statement to make, but I think the tradition of the church and the style that a given congregation or denomination uses in hymn singing is important to be sensitive to. Secondly, I think it's very important to be sensitive to both the text and the style of music. Not all hymns should be sung in the same tempo and the same way. A meditative, introspective prayer hymn needs to be sung very differently than a hymn that is either a sending out hymn or a hymn of praise. Hispanic hymns need to be sung differently than a German chorale. Gospel hymns are sung very differently than a chant. So I think we need to be knowledgeable about the background of the hymn and the style of music of the hymn, and use that in the way we interpret hymns when we play them and sing them.
I think one of the biggest elements today in hymn playing, the thing that we have to think about most creatively, is encouraging creativity on the part of the person who is accompanying the singing. When I was learning to play hymns and the organ in general, I thought that the page was to be worshipped. Whatever was on the page was to be hallowed and believed, and that the musician's job was to find out how to do just exactly what was on the page. But now we are I think, we've come in progressing to the point of realizing that the musician is the creative person who is the interpreter of what is on the page in light of who is in the congregation and where we are singing, and what the mood is, and where the hymn is in the service. So the musician must calculate all these things and say, well, actually, this is the first hymn in the service, and we need to be sturdy about this. This is a hymn of praise of God. Although I realize it's a Sunday, it's a summer Sunday, and we don't have a choir, and people will probably need a little help, although it is a well-known hymn, so that we have to calculate all these things as we prepare to accompany the people. There's never just a pat way to play a hymn. It should be the result of what's on the page, what was chosen as a text and tune, and then the musician's pastoral interpretation in terms of the people who are going to be singing. Sometimes we get a surprise. I used to play in a church where my back was to the people and I would begin the prelude, but there was no way that I could really begin the first hymn until I looked out and saw how many people were there, because that has to influence the way that this hymn is played.
First impressions are lasting impressions, and this is certainly true when introducing a hymn. Make sure that you carefully and consciously set the tempo in your introduction that you expect the congregation to follow when they join you on the first stanza. In choosing correct, comfortable tempos, you should consider the building, your worship tradition, and the differences between congregations. Sometimes people at an early service don't sing with quite the vigor that people do at a later service. As you're working out what the correct tempo of your hymns should be, think about these criteria. Look at the hymn. Are there 8th notes or 16th notes or long-held notes in the melody? The shortest notes must sound easy and unhurried, while the longest note shouldn't be too slow or feel dragged along. Hymn tunes which have chord changes with every beat must be played deliberately to allow each chord to be clearly established. Let's look at the hymn tune Melita. Let's speed it up and see if we like the way it sounds in the third system. Well, we found out that it's possible to do technically, but I'm not sure it would make too many congregations happy. One of the advantages for carefully scanning a text means that you are deeply involved with the meaning of the hymn. Another way to get very involved with the hymn is to sing it yourself as you're practicing. And on Sunday mornings, when the adrenaline is flowing at a little faster speed, before you start a hymn, sing through at least the first line in your mind's ear. If there happens to be faster denominations of notes in the hymn, make sure that you subdivide the first notes so that you leave time for the shorter notes that will occur later in the hymn. Setting the proper tempo in your hymn introduction ensures that the congregation will know when and how to start. Above all, as a hymn player, you want to always stroke the congregation into singing with you. You never want to embarrass the congregation by having them start or draw individual attention to themselves. Singing is a very personal activity, and people often feel quite involved and embarrassed if attention is shown to them in the wrong way.
I had a student assistant at one point who, in what seemed to me was a totally unpredictable way, kept speeding up and slowing down. And it turned out that he was doing that with reference to what he felt about what was going on in the text. But of course, we didn't know what he felt about going, and all we knew is that we didn't know where he was going. And so that we felt that we couldn't really trust him. And to a certain extent, we were right, because he was so busy about thinking about himself that he certainly wasn't thinking about us, and much less any sort of sense of ensemble of him and us all at once. And so we just felt that we were sort of floundering. Being unreliable rhythmically, I think, is perhaps the thing that's most detracting.
Another important time to illustrate good articulation is at the ends of phrases. You develop a good rapport and a good sense of trust with your singing congregation when you give them equal lengths of breathing space at the end of each phrase. And of course, that holds true at the end of the hymn. As you're becoming acquainted with the hymns for your service each Sunday, sing them through as though you were going to be a member of the congregation, and determine what the realistic breathing places should be. After you have sung the hymn through, make sure that you can carry that same sense of cantabile singing and breathing to your fingertips. An organist needs to play as a singer sings, and you must give your singers a chance to breathe. The only way you can give them a chance to breathe is by raising your fingers at the ends of phrases and giving them time. When you come to the end of a phrase and you need to leave space for your congregation to breathe before beginning the next phrase, you do not delay the entry of the next phrase to accommodate the time for their breath, but instead subtract it from the previous note. Again, look at the hymn tune Lions and follow along. You will need to determine phrasing and breathing points. Short phrases should be sung more deliberately to give them balance and dignity. A good example of this is the hymn tune St. Anne. Longer patterns need to move more quickly to make the phrases possible to sing in one breath. The thought structure of individual lines and the human breath supply should come out together and evenly. Know well the acoustics of the worship space. An acoustically alive room will require a tempo which accommodates its reverberation, whereas a dry room with no reverberation can handle a somewhat faster tempo. Define the period and history from which the tune came and the style of composition. A stalwart German chorale will naturally travel at a different speed than an early American tune. And last but not least, can you sing and breathe comfortably with your tempo? Sing when you are practicing, but don't sing when you are playing for a service. You'll find that your own singing masks whether the congregation is moving along with you.
And I also know that congregations often have a kind of musical sense that is greater than mine. And if their sense is that they want to pause in a certain place, I have to take the group consensus. It's not a contest that I'm right and I'm right and 500 other people are wrong. That I may have a louder voice simply because I'm playing a loud instrument. But if it's a community, if singing is a community effort, then I'm part of that community. and I can provide leadership. But if I want to go to the right and everybody else wants to go to the left, it may just be that I'm wrong. So that, and groups do have, I feel that groups have some sort of, especially groups that sing together a lot, have some sort of musical sense about how it ought to go for them. And if I don't listen to them carefully, then I'm bucking them and making it hard for them and preventing them from doing what really is natural to them. And after all, I'm playing an instrument. I'm working with my fingers and my brain, and they're the ones that are working with their lungs and their bodies. And the fingers don't need to breathe, but they need to breathe, and it may just be that I haven't allowed them enough time to breathe. But I need to know what's going on with their breath.
And so one needs to look at a phrase. Where is it likely that people are going to have to take a breath? How long can a phrase be sustained within a quote-unquote typical length of breath? I don't know that there's any way to do that except by actually singing it. You can look at the page and guess certain things, but one never knows until one has felt it with all one's senses, breathed through it oneself, sung through it, all those kinds of things. And even in an art song recital, the accompanist learns where it is that the singer, the well-trained singer, needs a little time for breath. Orchestras that accompany opera singers in the opera do the same thing. And it becomes, I think, a matter of the accompanist, whether it's a keyboard accompanist or choir accompanying a soloist or orchestra accompanying a soloist, whatever. A matter for people to know what it feels like to sing a particular hymn. How do the phrases feel in the body?
Accents can be grouped into 4 categories: metrical, pitch, agogic, and cumulative. Accents and understanding of them are of primary importance in playing the organ, most specifically in hymn playing. How well you understand the accents is easily heard through your articulation. In metrical accents, the accent falls on the first beat of the bar. It's important sometimes to set up that accent pattern, but you want to stay away from always stressing the first beat of the bar just because it is the first beat. Another important type of accent is that of pitch. And this accent is applied according to the range of the notes, usually implying that the highest note or the textual emphasis is given special consideration. A higher note does not by virtue of its height automatically imply an accent, but only a tendency. An example of pitch accent can be found in 2 different tunes that have been matched to the text of O Little Town of Bethlehem. The first tune is Forest Green. Notice as the line goes up that you kind of linger on the note a little bit and just almost let it spill over into the next beat. hymn is the common chord that connects all music making, you have to be careful to not overdo this. It's the most subtle example of rubato. The other tune that's associated with O Little Town of Bethlehem is St. Louis, and the classic accent, pitch accent example is in the last system. Another example of accent is a Gogic accent, and that's when there's a slight lingering on a note which confers the effect of an accent. And you can hear this in the hymn tune Melita. The final category of accent is cumulative. This accent falls upon a note when its precedents are so arranged as to give it special prominence. The most classic example of cumulative accent is in Darwall's 148th. Notice how the wonderful arpeggio pattern rises right up to the top, and you don't want to let that top note lose an instant of energy. Notice what happens if you're not careful. Did you feel as though the music was tilting a little bit? Imagine what it would be like if you only sang once a week as most people in church do. You have to give them a good solid rope to hang on to, and that rope is rhythm.
Also, I think that the musician who's accompanying can help draw people into hymn singing by making the introduction so attractive that it catches people's attention. It should never be the same. It should always mirror the nature of the hymn. If it's a strong hymn of faith, it should be a strong and sturdy introduction in exactly the tempo that people are expected to sing. If it's a hymn of sorrow or if it's a hymn of meditation, then the introduction should be in exactly the right tempo, but also should reflect the mood, so that people get the idea from the minute the introduction starts that the person who's playing is really prepared to enjoy this whole event of singing this hymn, and that they would probably do well to get on board, because this is going to be something special in the life of the congregation. This is singing a hymn.
One of the organist's greatest strengths in hymn playing is to have consistent rhythm throughout each measure. But the biggest help you can give a congregation is to have equal pauses between stanzas. There are many different schools of thought on how long those pauses should be. And granted, there should be some flexibility depending on the habits of your congregation and the room in which they sing. But a good criteria or rule of thumb, is to hold out the last note for its full value and into the next measure, a complete measure, subtracting the length of one pulse breath. Now that may sound a bit confusing to you, so let's illustrate. Let's look first at a hymn, O Master, Let Me Walk With Thee, the tune Meriton. Let's look at the last measure. It is a dotted half note. A good recommendation would be to hold out the last beat of that measure for its full value and tie it over into the next measure into a half note, lifting up on the third beat of that imaginary measure. That gives your congregation time to breathe, and it also keeps the pulse very steady. Listen and sing along. Some hymns do not have the same number of beats in each bar, or they do not even begin with a time signature. So our rule of carrying over measure to measure has to be slightly amended. Let's look at the hymn tune Jesu meine Freude. The last beat is a half note. A good recommendation in this situation would be to again tie that half note over the bar line and make it a dotted half note into the imaginary measure, lifting up on the fourth beat of that imaginary measure so that you can come in with a good quarter note pulse at the beginning of the hymn. Let's see if it works. One of the most important things that you must discipline yourself with is to always have the same length of distance between the measures and between the stanzas. If you change that, you break a silent trust between yourself and the people for whom you're playing. Once you break that trust, it's hard to recapture it during that hymn.
Now, again, there's no easy formula for that. You can obviously say, at the end of every stanza, I am going to allow X number of beats between the verses. And that may work, but it can also become extremely mechanical. If you start messing around with that, of course, so it gets different from verse to verse, you can really screw up congregations as well. So you have to have some sense of that. But it is not simply a mechanical sense, because breathing is not simply mechanical. Breathing is life. And life has to do with heartbeat, which is rhythmic and regular and pulses, but it doesn't pulse in a mechanical way that a machine would.